Hello there. So I'm in a bit of a Def Leppard renaissance at the moment. I really want to get back and finish off the full discography and also the Phil Collins live stuff as well. Maybe even go on to Vivian Campbell live stuff too. Show some different ears of the band. And while I'm in this mood, I wanted to get on with the video. I've been meaning to do for maybe a few years now, quite a long time. But essentially, many years ago, I used to like making the odd analysis style video on Def Leppard and some of the recording techniques and stuff like that. And back then, I didn't have as many subscribers. And the subscribers I did have, they were all hardcore Def Leppard fans like myself. So I maybe took a few liberties in how I made these videos. And, I maybe naively assumed that the only people who would ever watch these videos would be hardcore Leopard fans who kind of knew the stuff I did anyway. But like I say, that's a very naive thing to do. And if ever you're putting something on the internet, you need to make it as bulletproof as possible. You need to include your references. You need to make it as transparent as possible so that anyone watching the video should be able to understand and see where you've got your information. So I want to correct some of these things because I never used to put any references. And even comments today, I might get asked, oh, how did Def Leppard do this? And I'll say, well, I've read that they did it this way. And so I want to show where I got some of this information, the sources I took them from. And that way, well, I don't think you should ever take my word for it anyway. You should maybe try and look for these things yourself as well. Hopefully I can point you in the right direction. But one of my biggest bugbears about the internet is that it's as much a source for misinformation than it is facts. And I realize with videos like this, where I didn't do referencing, I'm just adding to that. So I'm not helping. I'm not helping the cause there. So I wanted to do this video to kind of show you where I've learned some of the things I've learned over the years. Because for the longest period of time, there was the internet before YouTube, and before Wikipedia, where there was lots of sites and forums where you'd learn about things or read about things. Now it seems we just all go to the same 2 or 3 websites to get our main information, which is good in some aspects, but we kind of lost the ability to hunt for information, and that's what I used to do when I first got on the internet. I maybe spent the first 10 to 12 years of my life not knowing what the band actually looked like. And I don't think I got on the internet until maybe 11, 12 years old. And then I just used to search for things about Def Leppard, and I came across so many cool places and sources of information. So I want to go through some of that. So one of the biggest ones, I guess, first of all, would be with regards to the Rockman. Because that's a big topic with Def Leppard and how they recorded, and they just all used to use the Rockman, which is correct. But I always read that there was a little bit more to it. Now, this used to be called Gear Sluts. It probably appropriately renamed to Gear Space. But I used to come on here because I found out that Mike Shipley, who was assistant engineer, mixing engineer for Mutt, and produced Adrenalize, he used to post on here. And he was so generous with what he shared and everything like that. And he talked about recording techniques and all the stuff they used to go through. And God, I think I remember when this was first posted, almost 20 years ago. But in it here, Mike talks about the use of the Rockman on his stereo, basically saying that is the guitar sound. And it's funny because we've had big YouTubers recently talk about the Rockman, and the Rockman's now shot up in value to be quite expensive. And I remember I had a Rockman back. I got a Rockman and then sold it on because even I felt, it's a cool sound, but it's maybe not everything. But yeah, so Mike Shipley here talks about the Rockman, but the thing I've always said when I've mentioned the Rockman, because I got it from here, is that the Rockmans they used were modded, specifically to a ZZ Top mod. So I've always maintained that whenever I've talked about the Rockman, and people say, "Oh, Rockman, that's the sound." There was more to it than that. But what's interesting is recently Phil's had a couple of interviews where he's talked about the Rockman not being modded. And actually, when I got a chance to have a chat with Pete Woodruff, he didn't recall the Rockmans they had been modded either. So it's interesting that we have, a few different first-hand sources, with different opinions on the Rockmans that were used. But certainly they were used. And this is where I also first learned about the Palmer speaker simulator as well, and that being part of the sound. And also in this post alone, this is a great little post. This is where I first learned about the band, for some of the clean guitar hits, stringing the guitar so that all the open strings were a chord. And I think you can really hear that on Animal, some of the clean guitar hits. I think that's that technique there. So I've mentioned these things in comments and maybe in some of those videos about aspects from this post alone. But Mike Shipley posted quite a lot on Gear Sluts, and he was, like I say, he was very generous with what he shared. Naturally, like most forums and the internet, some of the topics of conversation kind of degraded into just needless opinion bashing and everything like that, which is a shame because there may be aspects of what Mike did and some of the equipment he used that weren't the norm, and people didn't believe him or stuff like that. It's so have a look out for that as well. But no, certainly I really appreciate that Mike shared all this information, because this was gold. This was gold for me when I was, in my teenage years. So that was one of the main sources there. I really got into, really getting into like the aspect of the gear and everything like that. And I used to always love looking up pictures of the guitars. And one of the sites where I could do that was this Steve Clark tribute site, Steve Clark Guitar in Loving Memory. Now, this isn't up on the internet anymore, so I've used Wayback Machine. But I was in contact with the owner for quite a lot of time. She put a lot of dedication and her time into this and everything. And if it wasn't for this site, I probably wouldn't be as big a fan of Steve Clark as I am. And I am a big fan anyway. But this really helped me appreciate Steve and learn about him even more. And so this site was great for learning about the, especially just looking at the guitars and looking at the gear he used. Pictures. I think I remember these pictures and information were from maybe a Japanese magazine, so it had to be translated. But there's the rack effect there for the Stereotour, which was the RG100 preamps, and then the TC Electronic 2290 delay and the 1210 flanger. Always guitars there. But there was cool interviews on this site as well, where this is where I first learned, of course, on the Def Leppard Classic Albums documentary, they talk about recording one string at a time. But this is where I learned about where they did it on other songs as well. This particular, is it this one here, this interview? No, it wasn't this one, it was this one. So this is actually from the Pyromania High and Dry songbook, which I did end up getting as a collectible, but there's a lot of cool information here. They're going through track by track, and here's Steve talking about where he plays the opening riff for Photograph and why he plays it on the 7th fret, and the notes he's played, and how it's a two-part guitar chord type thing, two guitars harmonizing with each other. And then on the bridge, they're talking about recording that string by string to get that keyboard effect and swelling it in. Lots of cool information like that. So this is where I first kind of learned about it being, string by string techniques on other songs, not just on like the bridge of Hysteria. And there's something else as well, because I'm sure it was High and Dry. I think it was Mirror Mirror. Yeah, there's the section where we first recorded separate strings to make chords. So even on High and Dry, they were doing stuff like that. So this was a great website for all these cool Steve interviews that I never thought I'd be able to read. Lots of Hysteria era stuff as well, and an interesting one here. Talking about Hysteria, and they're talking about the solos they did, and then Steve's saying, "Oh, I did the solo in Women," and I think this might be an example of a misprint. And we might see a couple more of those in these next few pages. But this is an example where there might be a bit of misinformation in there, either from, like I say, a misprint or something like that, but I'm pretty sure it's not Steve and women. That's what I think anyway. Here's a cool bit. Apparently there used to be an E chord after the last D at the end of women. Incredible. So this was another big site for me where I learned a lot. And I may have referenced to before, but like I say, if you want to kind of check this site out, you'd have to go on Wayback Machine and Steve Clark Guitar and Love and Memory. Another cool place for gear as well. I don't know if I still have it up, but yeah, this was let's see if I can get to the home bit. But there was a chap called Brooks, and for the longest time I didn't. Well, I always knew there was a chap called Brooks anyway, and I knew that he was a massive Phil Collins fan, and he had a load of Phil Collins guitars and cool custom like PCs, PC1s, PC archtops, and everything like that. And this is where I learned a little bit about Phil Collins gear, and there was even like snapshots from magazines talking about techniques and everything like that. But he even had pages which showed, even Rick Savage's gear and everything like that. So that's how I knew about, what Rick Savage used to use Washburn, and he then went on to he went from Hamer to Washburn, and then he went on to he's now with Jackson, I think. This is where I learned a lot about kind of guitar stuff with the guys. But yeah, recently there's been a renaissance in the kind of Phil Collins guitar stuff. I'll put a link in. A chap called Alex King has been kind of leading the way and keeping that stuff going. And he recently did a cool guitar summit with Brooks and a couple other hardcore Phil fans who actually met very recently. Suff and Victor, very, very nice guys, all big Phil Collins fans. So it's great to kind of see that community still going. But yeah, this site, I used to go on this site all the time and just drool over all the guitars that Brooks had. So those are the main kind of guitar-y ones. In terms of Def Leppard, there was the main Def Leppard website, and there was also, I used to come onto this site a lot, Def Leppard UK, because there used to be a lot of links to interviews and stuff like that, and I learned a lot from interviews. Like this one in particular was a big one for me, talking to Erwin, who helped engineer on Hysteria, and this is where I first learned about the aspect of the guys having to EQ it, like every syllable of a vocal performance. It's like that's they spent so much time getting into that level of detail. Another thing, every single note of the bass was on a different track, so they had so much control over everything. And when people talk about Hysteria, I think the string by string thing gets the most attention, and they think, oh well, why couldn't they just play the guitar all the way through? And it's like, it's not that at all. So much attention was taken to every aspect of that recording, of every instrument, that they probably had to do it like this. Otherwise, if you spend that much time making sure the basses sounded great, it's like if you just did everything else regularly, it wouldn't fit. So everything had to go through that level of scrutiny and detail, and it's through methods like this. And I'm sure I've said in comments and talked about the fact that they had to EQ every syllable, whether or not they had to do that for everything or it's just one case here. But certainly there's a first-hand source from Erwin with regards to that. And it would only be through Def Leppard UK that would find that out. So there's sources for so many interviews from this site. And this is where I first learned about a lot of cool facts about the band when a Greek site called Rock Pages did these interviews with people related to the band, and there's guys related to some aspects of the X album and slang and everything like that. And who was I going to try and get? yeah, so many people. Like Dave Cousins, who did the intro for When the Walls Came Tumbling Down, and where is it? Stevie Van Lang, of course, Mutt's ex-wife, who did backing vocals on When Love and Hate Collide. That was the last one. And this is where I first learned about Rocky Newton, who did backing vocals on Pyromania and Hysteria. And I think he talks about on Hysteria he was brought in to kind of do what Joe would normally do with the backing vocals because he had a similar range. But yeah, so it was through this that I first learned about Rocky Newton. And so this all comes from this chap here. Sorry for butchering the name, but Sakis Nikas. And he ran, or still runs, Rock Pages. I don't think they have these interviews up on the page now. But Sakis is still doing interviews and still interviewing the band. And he's recently been on the Def Leppard pod with Neil, sharing some great insights. So, a big thank you to himself and also Darren's UK site for all this information. There's so much here. So much. Another cool site I used to go on was Andy Airfix, who designed the covers for Pyromania and Hysteria. He used to have a little blog, and he'd go through the history of designing the sleeves. And yeah, I remember when he was posting these at the time, and it was incredible to see. Yeah, I used to love just seeing stuff like this. It was, yeah, just absolute gold again for me. And I emailed Andy a couple of times with regards to these, with regards to his stories and all the cool things he put up, and he replied to me, and he was came across really, really nicely. I always appreciate that he took the time to reply to me. And here he shows the designs that they used to put on T-shirts, and I think there's even pictures of Lars Ulrich wearing one of these T-shirts that he must have got from the Q Prime management. But essentially, they'd wear these T-shirts when the record companies were coming by asking, "Oh, when's the album going to be released?" It's like, we don't know, don't ask again. That's what they'd be wearing. There's a lot of cool information here about the history of the artwork. So check that out. Andy's blog. And what else was there? So there's also the odd interviews in recent years. There's been a lot with regards to Hysteria, and I'll get to that. But even on the either 20th or 25th anniversary, there was track by track interviews with Phil. He talked more and more about the recording aspect, because recently there's been a lot more interviews where they've talked about things, but back then there wasn't as much. So all this was just, I was like dying to read every little thing I could about the recording and about all the information about the band. But what's quite funny is there might be another incident of a misprint here. He talks about Gods of War, then he says really going good, but we fucked up on the chorus. Now, I don't think it was relation to the Gods of War, because I've heard him say that before for Don't Shoot Shotgun, and actually also for Run Riot. So I think that might be for one of these two songs. But it's interesting that he says, he thinks Run Riot's the weakest song on the album. But lots of cool information there. And then in more recent years, Sav did a track by track for the 30th anniversary, and it was here that I first learned about the Rock Box. So not the Rockman, but the Rock Box. So he talks about Hysteria. There was a box called the Rock Box, and it was very similar to the Rockman, and that was this tiny little thing you plugged in. But it's saying here they might have used the Rock Box specifically for the clean. But again, Sav shares some interesting insight on the songs, about who wrote what, which is really cool. And the Nigel Green interview from, when was it? For the 30th anniversary, he also talks about the Rock Box. So it's funny that they both came out at the same time. I'd never heard of it before. And then, then we had two sources at once talking about it. There we go. So the plan was pretty much going to use either Rockman or the Rock Box for everything guitar-wise, which was cool. He talks in here about using the kind of DBX machines to trigger stuff and everything like that. So it's a really good interview too. And probably lastly, there was when YouTube first kind of came about, there were a few channels that started uploading Def Leppard content and content I had never seen before, um, like old interviews and everything like that, and cool concert footage. And one of the main sources for that was Andy LGR. He used to always end up on his channel, because I think when YouTube first started, I think every day I was going on, typing in Def Leppard and then filtering it to see, what was the newest thing uploaded that was Def Leppard related, and it would normally be something from Andy. And I mean, there was cool stuff here, like sound check footage, and it's a really cool interview where Steve and Phil are talking for the Swedish interviewer, and there's a little bit of hesitation when talking about the use of drum machines on Hysteria. But there's all sorts, and there's a few other sites like that as well, like Bludgeon Rafola and Archive 625. All those guys were great at uploading stuff. So again, this is where I started to learn about the band. But yeah, so essentially, I just wanted to show that's where I used to pick up some of this information. And I mean, like I say, still now I'm maybe replying to comments. Oh, I read this, I read that, and this is probably where I got all that from. But like I say, don't always just take my word for it, or anyone else's word for it. See if you can find these sources, and that's what I did with when I, very luckily to get a chance to talk to Pete Woodruff, because Pete was interviewed by Sakis on here as well, and I learned a lot of stuff, and then I was able to get in touch with him and ask him some other things as well. So yeah, that's where I kind of got the idea from. But yeah, so there's a lot of cool information still out there. You just have to kind of find it. But if ever you want to read more about the band, that's not just on YouTube or not just any of these silly videos, then it's all out there. Okay. But essentially, this is just a video. It's just an excuse for me to show that. The other day, I finally got to meet Phil, and yeah, he's an absolute gent of a guy. Okay. Cheers, guys.